The air was cold, a deep, penetrating cold that settled into the bone marrow, despite the layers of fleece and gore. It was the kind of cold only found at high altitude in the Afghan desert. Sharp and utterly silent, Chief Petty Officer Kalen, call sign Ghost, moved with the fluid, low gait of a man who treated every step as a potential grave. His senses were stretched thin, mapping the loose gravel and shale of the wadi floor. They had been moving for 3 hours since the low-altitude halo drop, and the silence had been the most corrosive part of the infiltration. Too quiet, he was the point man. M4A1 pressed high, cheek welded to the stock, relying purely on the green thermal wash of his PVS-31 SA. He counted the paces, a drilled reflex. 21, 20, 19. The extraction pointer, prevented depression near the target compound, was 17 meters ahead. The objective was simple: snatch a high-value logistics coordinator HVL, who was believed to be waiting for an exchange. Quick in, quicker out. Then, at step 13, the silence cracked. It wasn't a sound of movement, not a cough or a whisper, but a resonant harmonic vibration in the ground, deep and low, like a large engine starting up miles away, or whereas a series of relays clicking into place directly beneath them. Kalen stopped mid-stride, his forward momentum instantly absorbed by muscle memory. The metallic smell of the high desert dust and ozone was suddenly overwhelmed by the sharp, undeniable scent of C4. He didn't need to see it. He could taste the synthetic bitterness on his tongue. 13 steps, 13 seconds, maybe less, until whatever system had just armed itself decided to unleash itself. He held his breath, the frantic beat of his own heart roaring in his ears, momentarily drowning out the sound of his team jocks. Miller and Reyes stacked 3 deep behind him. He could feel the fine, gritty dust of the canyon floor vibrating through the soles of his specialized boots. The feeling was terrifyingly intimate. It was the sound of a cage door slamming shut. Kalen tried to cycle the word contact through his dry throat, but all that came out was a strang-lad, rasping exhale that fogged the lower edge of his night vision goggles. The heat of that realization, burning away the cold night air. Where exactly do you stand when the fuse is lit? He desperately searched the infrared wash for anomalies, for a tripwire or a pressure plate, knowing intellectually that if he could see it now, it was already too late. He didn't find a wire. He found a flicker of light, impossibly brief and high up on the northern ridge, a single, minuscule flash of orange flare gun signal, maybe 400 meters. Above them, perfectly positioned to illuminate the entire wash they were standing in. They weren't just stepping into an ambush. They had walked directly into the center of a coordinated kill box, choreographed down to the second. The mission, Kalan knew instantly, was fatally compromised. They were pinned between a high-explosive trap below and a visual executioner above. 13 seconds. His mind raced through the protocol's run freeze, retreat, each one ending in the same catastrophic failure. He looked down at the gravel beneath his feet, which suddenly felt less like earth and more like a thin, brittle skin stretched over oblivion. The vibration under Kellen's boots intensified, now a pulsing thrum that rattled his teeth. It was an unmistakable seismic signature of multiple heavy-duty IEDs arming simultaneously. His internal count hit 6 seconds. He slammed his fist down, the universal, silent signal for immediate dome danger close. Just as the orange flare burst high overhead, bathing the narrow canyon in a sickly, sulfurous light, the sudden illumination was blinding, turning the night vision green into a useless, blinding whiteout for a critical second. When Kellen's eyes adjusted, he saw the wadi for what it was: a perfect V-shaped funnel of loose rock and death. This was Operation Hydra, Kellen's four-main SEAL element to sniper observers, a comms expert, and the chief leading the Wahad had been sent deep into the Hindu Kush region, precisely 280 kilometers from the nearest secure base. Their target, the HVL, was funneling massive amounts of Iranian equipment into local insurgent networks. The intel had been solid. A rendezvous in this isolated pocket, low risk of collateral, high chance of success. Now, the intel was revealed to be a poison pill. The immediate sensory input confirmed the worst. The high ground on both the northern and southern ridges, previously dark and silent, was suddenly alive with muzzle flashes. It wasn't the scattered return fire of a surprise picket. It was heavy, coordinated fire from multiple DSHK, heavy machine guns and RP. They weren't facing a squad. They were facing a company-sized blocking force, at least 30, maybe 40 fighters who had been waiting for them patiently. Kalen pressed himself flat against the cold, jagged rock face. Team packed of 7.62 rounds chipping the granite inches from his helmet. The deafening cracks and zips replaced the previous silence. an overwhelming symphony of death. Reyes, Coombs. Now! Status reports and get us a vector on exfil, Cullen yelled, the sound thin and lost against the roar of the heavy machine guns. Reyes, the youngest man on the team, was stacked immediately behind Jocks, desperately trying to unfold the Higain antenna for the satellite radio, a bulky piece of equipment vital for getting the crucial burst message out. He was halfway up when a volley of fire concentrated on their position. The impact was brutal. A line of rounds walked up the shell slope, slamming into Reyes' chest and shoulder plates. The armor held, absorbing the kinetic energy, but the third round hit the delicate Coombs antenna, shearing it clean off, sending sparks flying. The impact threw Reyes backward into the dirt, knocking the wind out of him with a heavy, wet thump. Reyes down, Coombs compromised. "I can't raise anyone," Jocks screamed, his voice raw with adrenaline, laying down suppressive fire with his M27 toward the north ridge, aiming for the muzzle flashes. Kalen felt a suffocating rush of guilt, a visceral, cold water shock that mirrored the death of his brother, Marcus, 6 months prior in a similar canyon, trapped by a failure of communication. Not again. He couldn't afford to let the tactical weight of his history paralyze him. They had no reliable way to call for extraction. Their main satellite radio was useless, shattered into plastic shrapnel. They were 17 meters from a mine dead zone, pinned in an open wadi, taking fire from 300 degrees. And their exfil route was a kilometer away. The temperature of the air seemed to drop another 10 degrees, but Kellen's blood was boiling. This wasn't a mission. It was a betrayal. Every instinct screamed that the enemy hadn't just guessed their location. They had been given it. He needed to move. But Reyes was immobile, stunned by the impact, his critical radio gear destroyed. The 13 seconds had expired long ago, replaced by a relentless, echoing minute of sustained fire. The machine gun fire from the North Ridge was devastatingly accurate, forcing Kite and Miller to scrape themselves into the meager protection of an overhang, which was more of a large rock shadow than actual cover. Jocks continued his relentless suppressive burst, trying to keep the enemy's heads down, but the sheer volume of incoming fire was overwhelming. They were being bracketed, rounds impacting both ahead and behind their position, walking closer with every volley. Miller, the team's designated medic and alternate sniper, checked Reyes quickly. Conscious, Kalen, plate cracked, maybe broken ribs. Secondary Coombs is shielded, but he can't reach it, and we can't hold this rock. The enemy was pushing the advantage. Now, Kalen could hear the shouts and the distinct, high-pitched whine of RPGs being loaded further up the ridge. An RPG hit would collapse their minimal cover and likely bury them alive. They had maybe 45 seconds before the first rocket hit. The decision was forced upon him. The secondary Coombs back Reyes' lifeline was strapped to the far side of his body, facing the incoming fire. To reach it, Kalen or Miller would have to expose 70% of their body mass to the concentrated fire zone. They also needed to stabilize Reyes and get him moving, which was impossible under this density of fire. Miller, cover me. Suppress the right flank. Focus on the muzzle flash near the boulder. Kalen barked, his voice tight. Negative. Kalen, it's suicide. We retreat back into the shadow of that crevice. Advise Wussatan. Miller countered, pointing frantically at a narrow, shallow cutout, 30 meters behind them. Retreat meant moving Reyes, exposed 30 meters under heavy fire, and risking the path they had just walked, which Kalen was 99% certain was mine. Pushing back was not escape, it was slow death. Negative on retreat, Miller, we're in the kill zone. We run, we die faster. Kalen analyzed aloud, his brain processing the variables at impossible speed. Jocks, keep those DSHKs busy. I need 2 seconds of silence. Kalen glanced at his grenade launcher, an M320 undersling on his carbine. His orders were explicit. Maintain radio silence until exfil confirmation. Using the launcher would announce their position globally, sacrificing any remaining element of surprise they might have hoped for. But silence now was cooperation with death. He took a deep breath, tasting the dust and the metallic ozone. He gripped the pistol grip of the launcher. Orders be damned. Survival took precedence over doctrine. He had to create a distraction, a brief, blinding moment of chaos that would draw the enemy fire to a non-essential location. He lined up the launcher. The high-pitched shouts of the enemy fighters were getting closer, maybe 200 meters. Kalen knew exactly where the biggest cluster of fire was, originating a rocky outcrop on the north ridge. He calculated the distance, elevation, and windage in a single second. he popped 3 high-explosive 40mm rounds into the air. Not at the enemy directly, but 50 meters behind the main concentration of fighters. He cycled the launcher with brutal speed. Thump thump, the 3 explosions were thunderous, reverberating through the wadi, shaking loose rock, and silencing the machine gun fire for a critical 3 seconds. It didn't injure the fighters, but it terrified them, forcing them to look behind, momentarily believing they were being flanked. Kalen didn't hesitate. He launched himself out from the cover, sprinting the 2 meters back toward Reyes. Ignoring Miller's panicked scream, he dropped next to Reyes, shielded the younger man's body with his own, and frantically ripped the secondary radio pack free. He felt the vibration of incoming rounds fizzing past his head, disturbing the air. The sound of the machine guns instantly resuming with furious, concentrated intent. His entire world narrowed down to the single, impossible task of reaching the small plastic radio and activating the emergency beacon. His chest burned, his vision tunneled. This was the moment where instinct overpowered training, where the need to save the men replaced the need to save the mission. Kalen dragged Reyes back toward the minimal cover, the secondary comms pack clutched in his left hand. The 340mm rounds had bought them precisely 5.4 seconds of reprieve before the enemy realized that explosions were a deliberate diversion. Now, they poured concentrated fire onto Kellen's position, the heavy caliber rounds shattering the rock around them, kicking up clouds of pulverized stone and iron dust. He had exposed himself for perhaps 7 seconds, total an eternity under that volume of fire. Miraculously, he was untouched, saved only by the enemy's temporary confusion and the rapid, precise suppressive fire laid down by Jocks and Miller. Reyes, you good to move 5 meters. I need you to confer mobility. Kylan gasped, his chest heaving, adrenaline making his entire body shake violently. Reyes groaned, forcing out a single word. No. His leg was trapped under a fallen piece of shale that had been dislodged by the machine gun impacts. The situation was dire. They were pinned, unable to move the casualty, and Kalen was now focused on the tiny, secondary radio. This wasn't a voice communication device. It was a burst transmitter capable of sending a single encrypted 2-second distress signal containing their GPS coordinates and the Trojan. Emergency code mining the mission was a trap and immediate extraction. Fire support was required. Kalan ripped the antenna free, his fingers trembling, trying to focus on the fine motor skills required to turn the dial. He had to dial the satellite frequency, hold the transmission button, and pray the signer found a relay satellite within the next 60 seconds before they were overrun or eliminated by the pending RPG strike. He pressed the transmit button. The tiny red LED on the device glowed, indicating a successful connection. He held his breath, listening not for sound, but for the vibration, the subtle feedback that confirmed the signal was actually leaving the canyon. It sent. He slumped back, exhausted, just as Jocks yelled RPG inbound. Get ready. The whoosh of the rocket was followed almost instantly by a blinding flash and deafening concussion. The RPG hit the overhang they had sought to retreat to earlier, perhaps 30 meters behind them. The concussive blast washed over them, a physical wave of heat and compressed air, followed by a shower of sharp debris. Kalen instinctively curled over Reyes, absorbing the blast with his pack. When the ringing stopped, Miller was coughing violently, his rifle still smoking. Jocks, however, was down. Not unconscious, but clutching his left shoulder, blood quickly blossoming through the uniform fabric. A heavy piece of shrapnel from the RPG explosion had lacerated his bicep and shoulder, a debilitating but non-fatal injury. Jocks. Status. I'm good. Keep going. Just ... keep going. Jocks spit out, struggling to roll over and maintain fire with his right arm. Kalan felt the crushing pressure of the consequences of his actions. The 40mm diversion had saved Reyes, but cost Jocks his mobility and cover. They were now 3 wounded, 1 severely hampered, trapped in a rock garden. Then, the secondary radio began to chirp a rare, dangerous confirmation signal. Kalen pressed the receiver to his ear, expecting to hear the clipped, professional tone of the JOC Joint Operations Center giving them an exfil window. Instead, the voice that crackled through was distorted, static-less, and chillingly specific. Hydra. Hold position confirming signal. Stand by for air support. But Hydra, listen closely to this confirmation. The HVL was never the target. Repeat. He was the bait. They knew your exact entry vector 2 days ago. They weren't waiting for a capture. They were waiting for you. Kaelin froze. The blood drained from his face, turning the grime on his skin into a sickly gray mask. He stared out into the darkness, suddenly realizing why the fire had been so precise, why the traps were so perfectly laid. This wasn't an opportunistic ambush. This was a targeted execution planned days in advance. Someone, somewhere, had known their every move and traded their lives for a strategic advantage. The true, agonizing terror was not the explosion they had avoided, but the calculated human betrayal that had guided them into the very mouth of the canyon. The revelation hung in the dust-choked air, heavier than the fear of the incoming machine gun fire. They were not victims of bad intelligence. They were victims of treason. Callum processed the information. The team knew their entry vector 2 days ago, and suddenly the flicker of light he had seen on the ground near their drop zone, which he had dismissed as reflective mineral, took on a sinister new meaning. It was a micro-tracker, placed well before they ever jumped. Air support, confirmed, Miller yelled, interrupting Callan's paralyzing thought process. High above the ridgelines, a sound cut through the cacophony of small arms. Fire, not the familiar thrum of a helicopter, but the high-pitched, insistent buzz of a pair of Reaper drones, operating at extreme altitude, were responding to the Trojan code. The air support wasn't going to be a clean surgical strike. It was going to be a blunt, terrifying sledgehammer. Smoke, green for cover. Now, Kalen ordered. Miller and Jocks, using their good arms, frantically tossed M18 smoke grenades. The heavy, oily, green smoke billowed instantly, quickly mixing with the dust and gunpowder fumes, providing a few seconds of obscuration. Just as the smoke thickened, the Reaper drones struck. The impact of the 500 lbj DAMs hitting the north and south ridges was catastrophic. The shockwave was massive, rattling the stones and sending secondary explosions echoing through the canyons. The ground physically jumped. The sustained enemy fire ceased entirely, replaced by panicked shouts and the dreadful sound of falling rock and debris. Kalen seized the moment. Miller, assist Jocks. I'll take Reyes. We move on 300 degrees. Now. They moved with brutal efficiency, half carrying, half dragging their wounded comrades through the shifting shale. Kalen had Reyes slung across his back, the heavy, dead weight of the younger man adding to his exhaustion. Every step was agonizing, the sound of the loose rocks alerting any surviving fighters to their movement. The ground was slick with oil and blood, both their own and the enemy's. They pushed relentlessly, traversing the dead center of the wadi, away from the immediate blast zones. They moved for 15 minutes, which felt like an entire deployment. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by the deep, physical agony of exertion and the chilling realization of their near obliteration. Finally, they stumbled out of the direct line of sight, into a small, dust-choked crevice. They were 2 clicks from the planned extraction point, which was undoubtedly compromised now, but the drone strikes had cleared the immediate pursuit. Kalen checked his men. Jocks was pale, the blood loss severe, but Miller had managed to apply a tourniquet. Reyes was semi-conscious, still racked with pain. They were survivors, not victors. The mission was a total loss, and 3 of the 4 operators were wounded. As Callum slumped against the cold rock, he ran his hand over the sandy ground. He felt something metallic, thin and sharp, pick it up. It was a single, spent brass casing, not 7.62 or 5.56, but a rare, high-caliber sniper round used primarily by designated marksman teams. He didn't recognize the make. It was too clean, too specific to be random debris. It meant that a highly skilled enemy marksman, operating under the veil of the machine gun fire, had deliberately allowed the team to survive the initial ambush, waiting for the next phase, anticipating their panic. The true horror wasn't the number of bodies they faced. It was the absolute, calculated precision of the enemy, an operation that went far beyond local insurgents. The extraction was brutal. Animat 60, alerted by the continuous drone surveillance, made a low-level, high-speed approach under the last curtain of night, battling high winds and the residual dust clouds from the ordnance. They were hoisted aboard one by one, Miller last, pulling the grappling hook free as the helicopter banked violently, climbing hard and fast toward friendly airspace. Inside the rattling cabin, the atmosphere was thick with the smell of sweat, hydraulic fluid, antiseptic, and the distinct, metallic temps of fear. Kalen sat against the fuselage wall, cradling his rifle, staring through the narrow window at the retreating mountain range now bathed in the cold, blue-gray light of predator. Reyes and Jocks were already receiving emergency medical treatment. The medic worked quickly, silently, his headlamp illuminating the bloody, fractured mess of Jocks' shoulder. Kalen felt utterly hollowed out, the adrenaline now leaving him shaky and cold. He was alive. His team was alive. But they had achieved nothing except survival. The image of the single, clean sniper casing and the distorted message from Jauk echoed in his mind. They were waiting for you. He closed his eyes. The 13 seconds, the moment of realization when the trap clicked shut, felt longer than his entire career. It wasn't the machine guns or the RPGs that broke him. It was the psychological certainty that their lives had been intentionally, methodically set up for sacrifice. Later, in a debriefing room that smelled too strongly of bleach and stale coffee, Kalen would report the discovery of the foreign casing and the communication anomaly. The official report would classify the event as a tactical failure due to compromised communications, infrastructure, and unexpected enemy numerical superiority. They would never mention the message about the bait, and they would never acknowledge the existence of the internal leak that cost the agency 3 months of reconnaissance and nearly cost 4 men their lives. Kalan knew the truth, though a secret held tightly in the silence of his scars. As the helicopter cleared the mountains, leaving the war zone behind, he looked down at his own hands, still dusted with the alien dirt of that deadly canyon. He saw the tremor, a physiological residue of the extreme pressure. He had run straight toward the fire, broken protocol, and survived the consequences. But the price of that survival was the knowledge that sometimes the enemy you face is not the one with the rifle, but the one holding the map. The dark always leaves a signature. What is the shape of your silence now?